I'm Mark Olson. I am a former young earth creationist. I will talk a little more about what that means, but I'm sure in this group you probably have a pretty good idea what that is, being in Kentucky and being so close to Ken Ham and the Ark Encounter. I was indoctrinated around the age of 6. I was also very interested in science and education, so there were a lot of conflicts because, as you know, young earth creationism says every word of the Bible is true and there's no variation. So we end up with some problems that I'll get into as I go into this. I've been told that my story is kind of interesting and I should write a book, so I did. And we will start like in Genesis, in the beginning, right?
Maybe leave that last one on. I think I can see you. Yeah.
You good?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So in the beginning, I started this life just like everyone else in this room. I was an atheist. We're all born that way. We don't have a faith when we're born. But my mother was a Catholic, and in Catholicism, there's the concept of original sin, and babies will actually end up in purgatory if they do not get baptized very soon. So I'm a little blob behind the lady in the pink dress here. We can't say much for my family's photography skills at the time. But about a month in or less, I had this strange guy in a robe pouring cold water over my head. I liked the Catholic Church because there were a lot of happy people. They had free beer in the basement for the grown-ups, bingo for everybody else. Didn't have to leave the church. He had a good time. Didn't understand Latin. This is before they allowed English in churches. But I didn't have too many conflicts, except for one. This is my parents. I blurred their faces for privacy reasons. This is them walking down the aisle in 1961. Well, you can't see too well behind them, so I've got a better version here, is my father was a Protestant, and according to the Catholic Church, he was not Christian enough to approach an altar. They put a physical fence up there to keep his unholy feet from touching that altar. And this would not be the first time in my life that I would have a conflict with religion telling me that a parent or family member wasn't holy enough. But it was the first, and I was 3-4 years old when I found out about this, and I was very offended because to me my parents are saints, and I will die on that hill. They're both very wonderful people. But so this was the first insult. The script kind of flipped when I was about 6 years old. We moved to Kentucky. My dad was from here. He met Mom during the Cold War. He was on a missile defense ring around Milwaukee in case the Soviet bombers came over. And in Kentucky, we had some new rules. The first thing I learned, well, I'm a little ahead of myself. I can't hardly see my notes. I apologize about that. So I started attending my dad's childhood church, is the point here. A very grainy photo of it. This used to be a tiny little building, but as you've discovered with churches who are tax-free, they tend to start growing and taking over more and more. That church was about a third of that size when I started attending. They now own almost all the land around it and are possibly putting in a bid on another 1.5 acres, which is worth a lot of money where this happens to be located. This was a young earth creationist church, and we'll talk a little bit about this, which I'm sure you guys know the script already. In young earth creationism, every word of the Bible is true. The earth is just 6,000 years old. Humans and dinosaurs walk together. Kids rode dinosaurs like they do at the Ark Encounter. What will be significant in a little bit is there were no rainbows before this global flood that happened with Noah's Ark. Evolution we weren't taught much about in school or in church, but we did know that it was a sin, whatever it was. I had no idea at this point. One thing that's very key is I was taught that hell was a real place that we were going to go and burn. And this was used constantly to beat me up, and I will return to this theme a lot. The only way to avoid hell was to follow Jesus. And as time would go on, I would learn there was some really bad apologetics. Now, these were the problems that they had with even me, I found out. I thought I was a Christian, but I was, as you saw in the earlier slide, a Catholic. So my Sunday school teachers told me, no, Mark, you're not a Christian. Catholics worship the popes. They worshipped idols, had the wrong number of books in the Bible. They prayed to Mary instead of Jesus. They prayed to saints instead of Jesus. And I used the word baptisma on the first slide, which is Greek for baptism. And what it really means is a sprinkling or cleansing in water. My Sunday school teacher told me, no, that means total immersion in water. And because I had not been totally immersed, because I was that little kid getting the water poured on my head, I was not a real Christian. And this worried me a lot. totally switching gears here. I love science, as I mentioned. When I was in the second grade, the teacher brought in this little glass triangle, held it up to a beam of light in the window, and a rainbow appeared on the wall. I've had a lifelong love affair with rainbows. My wife knows I collect rainbow photos. On the right, that's one I shot in Mongolia in 2008. I've done this all my life. What fascinated me was the physics behind all this, that white light was really made up of different colors. And I absorbed all that even as a small child. And I don't want to sound vain in any way. I was the little geek. That's how they dressed me when I was young. This is how I used to dress. My parents really emphasized education. I learned to read at an adult level somewhere around age 8 or 9. I love this. And it's not that I'm special. I think every child has this capability. You've got to find something you're interested in, mold them. And science just happened to be my thing. Much to the chagrin of my parents. We had no internet when I was young, so when I got bored, my mom would hand us either the children's encyclopedia or the adult encyclopedia. Unfortunately for them, this is the Chinese recipe for gunpowder. They had it translated into English. And I had the charcoal on the back porch. Our local store was a food store / farm goods store, and they had sulfur blocks for cattle to lick for nutrition. Sulfur is very brittle, and if you hit it with your elbow, chips will fall off. And when your dad's not looking, you put them in your pocket. Saltpeter was hard to come by. Pharmacists were on to me, but I finally got it, and I did succeed in making gunpowder. Never got caught. Then I got to World War I in my history books and learned about chlorine gas. I learned how to make that. My mom thought I was going to help out cleaning around the house when she saw me carrying all the cleaning products, but no, I did make it. I did harm my lungs a little bit from it, and I got caught. So what was their response? Let me back up a minute. On that rainbow, when they talked about the rainbow in church, when they talked about it happening for the first time, I raised my hand and said, no, that cannot possibly be true. Let me tell you about the physics of rainbows. My teacher, Sunday school teacher, got upset with me, stopped the class, pointed at me and said, Mark, Satan is speaking through you. Mark, Satan is speaking through Mark, and he's going to drag him to hell, and he's going to burn because every word of the Bible is true. So that's how my church reacted to every science problem, every biblical problem I would ever bring to them. So how did my parents react to me with gunpowder and chlorine gas? Well, Christmas morning, there was a chemistry set. The point I want to make here is that we often hear about schools indoctrinating children. I was never threatened with hell for getting a chemistry experiment wrong. I was threatened with hell a lot in church because I contradicted. So we can encourage children, we can encourage others to learn, even if there's a lot I don't know. I'm a computer scientist, not a natural scientist, but I just love this kind of stuff. But yeah, so this process would continue. There are a lot of examples that I won't bore you with tonight about Mark did something in science, went to church, and found out that he was going to burn for it. And those topics included physics, chemistry, astronomy, dinosaurs, fossils, age of the earth, biology, geology, you name it. I would come to school and say, I can show you for sure that the earth is not 6,000 years old. Mark, you're going to burn in hell. Sometimes they would send notes home with my parents. Everything that I ever learned in church was different than what I learned in school, in the secular world. But I was also a very dedicated Christian. This is my first Bible. It used to be white leather. I wore the heck out of it. I mentioned I started reading it as a young child. This one of my projects was to read the whole Bible cover to cover. And I got through it several times. My church actually told me, don't do this. You need guidance. You need somebody to be there and explain these things to you. Because, of course, if you've ever read the whole Bible, you start running into problems really quickly. Genesis 2 disagrees with Genesis 1. Yeah. Some of you guys know. I've seen the heads nod. I don't need to tell you where all the problems are with it. Poor Eve, though, I do want to give Eve a shout out. She was not there in Genesis 2 to get the instructions about the garden. Adam got them, but we always blame the women. You'll hear that theme again a lot tonight. Always blame the women. Had a lot of problems, and that is Lot, the biblical character Lot, so that's a pun you're all supposed to laugh at. Thank you. Somebody did. we were told these people were really good, just people. Lot is glorified in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The problem with that is that if you remember the stories with the angels who disguised themselves as men and came to his house, and the crowd wanted to gang rape the men. And Lot went outside and said, no, don't do such a sinful thing. You can't rape men. Take my daughters instead, they're virgins. And he offered his daughters up to the crowd. The angels did thankfully intervene. Lot eventually ends up escaping, but his daughters got him drunk and took advantage of him and had sex with him and had children through their father, incest. But it's the girl's fault. It's always the women's fault. Lot is held up as a great example. I started questioning the moral examples of my church, and the story of Abraham and Isaac really got to me, because after learning about this, I was afraid that, oh my gosh, if God told my parents to kill me, would they actually do it? Would people really kill in the name of God? I'm a little kid, and they're telling me that, yes, it's okay to kill in the name of God. If God says it, if it's in the Bible, you're not worthy. It's okay to kill. And they said, oh, by the way, this was just an example. God didn't really mean for Isaac to die. It was all just a test. Well, nobody ever told me about Jephthah. If you have heard this story, some of you, okay, this one's a little more obscure. This is why they didn't want me to read the Bible. Jephthah was a battle commander, and he needed a victory, and he promised God that if he got that victory, he would sacrifice the first thing that he saw when he came home. Well, he came home, and his one and only daughter, who, she's a woman, doesn't even give her a name in the Bible, is Jephthah's daughter. She came dancing out, singing, playing music. He's like, sorry, honey, you're going to literally be toast. He was good enough to give her a weekend in the mountains with her friends and mourn her lost motherhood. And she returned to him, and he slit her throat and put her on a stack of wood and burned her. And my church all nodded and said, hey, this is a really good thing. And at this point, I'm thinking, could people really be so brainwashed that they would kill in the name of religion? Well, yes, they would. I got my answer one morning in 2001, September 11th. And the statements from the people who did this echoed so closely the fundamentalists that I learned from. And I should say here, I'm not here to attack religion. I'm married to a wonderful religious person. I have a lot of religious people in my family, but they don't have these fundamentalist ideas. So I'm really here to talk about fundamentalism. And sometimes it's hard to walk that line and not cross it. So I'm not saying that religion did this. I'm saying fundamentalism did this. Bad morals, bad practices, could it get worse? Unfortunately, it could. So when we moved back to Kentucky, we had a neighbor, a nice, straight, heterosexual white male who dated girls, did really well in school, went to church every Sunday. His family was really well known. And he sexually molested me over a period of, for a very long time. And he made me promise not to tell God. He knew I was religious. He said that if you say this, God's going to burn you. If you talk about this, sorry, it's not always easy. God will punish you if you talk about this. And I knew something was wrong. I was a little kid. But I knew you weren't supposed to be without clothing in front of other people. I didn't understand the physical part of it. I won't go into that. But I knew something was wrong. So I eventually managed to put an end to it. But the problem with this is that I grew up with a life of shame. I felt like I was in sin, and I couldn't confess my sin to anybody. If I went to church, I had done something wrong, and I'd already promised God. Lots of things go on in the mind of a little kid, and I became, I don't want to misdiagnose, not schizophrenic, but I became two people. I was the scientist, I was the church kid, and it tore me apart inside. I finally put an end to the abuse. I said, I don't care if I promised. He said, okay, promise this will happen one more time and we're done with it. Totally go off on a tangent that you don't think is really applicable here, but my abuser was not a drag queen. My abuser was not gay. My abuser was not transgender. My abuser was a straight white male who went to church every Sunday. And what do we see happening in the world around us right now? we look at somebody like this and say, oh, they're a pedophile. I could tell you where the pedophile was. I'm not saying that every Christian is a pedophile, but I could tell you that I have a lot of LGBTQ people in my family and friends circle, some of them who babysat me when I was a kid, and none of them ever did to me what this horrible, horrible man did. So we need to stop blaming other people. And one last thing, when somebody's sexually abused and they come forward, and a lot of times it's women who do this, don't you notice we always blame the women? We don't, they asked for it. Maybe I asked for it when I was a kid. Maybe I was promiscuous. It's all my fault. So this went on for like a decade, and I still withheld. I still thought maybe I'm a Christian. Maybe God loves me. And that all changed on one night. This is the Hippodrome Theater in Corbin, Kentucky. Admission for movies was 25 cents. Popcorn was 5 cents, and so was a pop. So for 35 cents, which was I would get for mowing a lawn, I could go to a movie. All the churches in our area decided that they needed to send their children to this particular movie. In the late 70s, early 80s, there was this wave of apocalyptic end-time movies that were made to frighten people. The most infamous, if you read deep conversion books, was A Thief in the Night. We thought that maybe this was the movie I saw, but I've watched this movie with great difficulty. The one I saw was a lot worse. And if you'll forgive me, I have resorted to AI a little bit because I can't find clips of the movie, but I sat down and put passages of my book into AI, and over a period of hours crafted things that reminded me. Remember, this is an audience full of little kids, right? And we have an announcer who's telling us that these people are burning because they didn't follow Jesus, and they're reaching out to the screen for the little kids to say, help us, forgive us, please help us. The kids around me were breaking down in tears. I was curled up in my chair. I was afraid to move. The other scene that stood with me, and again, a recreation, I apologize, but I worked even down to the Carol syrup effect that you'll see here. The whore of Babylon was going to come and drink the blood of all the Christians. I didn't know what a whore was. I had no idea. I was too little. But I knew I didn't want a whore drinking my blood. This movie went on with scenes like this for over an hour. And the children left the audience in tears. I was terrified. I couldn't sleep. I woke up with nightmares. We had lived next to an interstate, and we were told that the angels were going to come down and blow a horn to signal the end times. I would wake up in the night with the semi blowing its horn, screaming and crying because I thought it was the end, and I went to bed as a non-Christian. So I ran out to work and got baptized. Now I wish that's not my baptism. That's Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which I think is the best movie in the world, and my wife will not let me. She leaves the house when I put it on. But I got totally immersed. I was baptized. I was washed in the blood of the Lamb. I did it the right way. I was a Christian. Thank God. I'm here to convert you to. No. I'm kidding. I was a Christian, but my mom still was not a Christian. She wasn't a member of the true religion. My nightmares got worse. Now when I went to bed, it wasn't me burning in hell. It was me sitting on a cloud in heaven, and my mom was down there screaming. And you remember the video I did earlier with the skin peeling off? I could see my mom's skin peeling off and regenerating. She's begging me, Mark, I was so good to you. Please talk to God. He's your friend. Let me into heaven. This hurts. And I would talk to this bright light, and the bright light would say, no, she had her chance. If you do what I do, I have some alternate identities. I'll go out on the web and get into Christian forums and talk to people. This is a common belief that people deserve to be punished like this. God in my dreams is the same, telling me the same message that people are telling me today. So I had to do something. And my church told me I was a gift sent by God to convert my mom. That was the purpose of my life, was to bring my mom into the true religion. They knew I knew the Bible really well. I could quote passages to make even them angry because I could find contradictions. But they decided to make me into a preacher. So this is me around age 13 or 14 delivering my first sermon in front of a church. There were some of the churches at the time had a program where they would take young men out and try to get them into the career of preaching. We'd have like preach-offs, like, preach Bible bowls where we would preach. And I got really good at it. But the time that I preached to my mom, she did not answer the altar call. I went home and collapsed in tears and didn't want to eat for days because I had failed my mom. I couldn't bring her in. And it's probably fair to ask at this point, my parents, where were they? They saw the mental trauma I was having. What did they do about it? You got to realize this happened gradually. This didn't happen just overnight. And by the time my parents realized there was a problem, and they're like, Mark, we don't want you going through this. You can go to another church. We'll work this out. They didn't understand. The Bible is full of references of Jesus telling us that we need to forsake our family and come to him. I was completely in a cult, to me, that echoed Jonestown. I was ready to forsake my parents and everything in the world just for this religion. So my parents really did care, and they really did try. There's this false perception that if you go to any kind of place of worship, you're a really good person.
Yep.
A lot of our country thinks that.
Yep.
There's a lot of bad things going on in religion. I'm not here to completely bash it, but we need to call it out. But people wrap themselves in the cloak of the Word of God and say, you can't criticize me or you're criticizing God. I didn't give up on science. I was alive for the debut episode of Cosmos. And this changed my life. I stayed up late at night, I think it was on Fridays, Friday night, watching Carl Sagan. He never preached to me. He never threatened me with burning in hell. He just laid out facts and said, think about this. Think this through. What's your logical conclusion on all of these dilemmas my church was posing, like dinosaurs walking with humans? And I came to a conclusion that I still believed in Jesus and I still believed in God, but I needed to break away from that particular church. I'm an ex-bicycle racer. This is what they call a breakaway, the guy on the left. That's me on the right, just proving I didn't used to be this chubby. The only argument I ever had with my father was when I told him I was not going to go to church anymore. I needed time to think all this out. He's like, Mark, you're going to give up your soul. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to work all this out. And the way I worked it out was I went to college. I majored in computer science and math, but I really loved natural sciences and actually liked college so much, I went back a second time. I thought I could be a doctor. Started at age 30 and found out the hard way after 2 years of pre-med. Maybe it's not going to work that way, but I did learn a lot about physics. One of my favorite experiments ever in college, I don't want to bore you guys with too much science, but on the left you can see the light from a star being split into a spectrum. These little absorption lines are elements, that chemical elements in the star absorb that. So not only can we look at a star and see what it's made out of without ever being able to visit it, but more importantly, these lines shift the farther away things are. It's a Doppler shift, and a man named Edwin Hubble discovered the Hubble constant. And what he did for me, the reason this is significant, is I, with my own eyes, sat in a lab and looked at light from a star that was, I think, 600 or 700 million years away. Now, my teacher in Sunday school told me rainbows didn't exist. I sat there and looked at I want to cuss, bleeping light from the star and could tell that she was wrong. Same thing with radiometric dating, the age of the Earth, the Grand Canyon getting hit with a wall of water. If you look at the sinuous pattern of the Grand Canyon here, that snake-like, that's like the Mississippi River. It's slow, meandering water. I learned this in a geology class. In 30 minutes in geology class, I learned that there is no way the Grand Canyon could have ever been carved by a flood. I've got some math on this I won't bore you with. In my second stint in school, we learned a lot about DNA. We learned about evolution finally. My school, like a lot of Kentucky schools in the outlying areas, will not teach evolution. They teach Darwin was this guy, crazy old guy with a white beard that learned something about some birds and some turtles, and that was about it. But I learned a lot about life here. The center slide is open heart surgery. I just want to mention this briefly. As a pre-med student, I was honored with being able to go into scrub in for 2 open heart surgeries and stand at the head of the table and look into a human chest and watch a heartbeat. They lost one patient. She died. they cleared everybody, pushed me against the wall, and worked for an hour and brought her back. And it was the most dramatic thing I've ever seen in my life. At the end of it, I walked into a little room outside the OR. The doctor was collapsed against the wall with his head in his hands. The people gathered around the lady who had been operated on. The family came in to see her, and they were all praising Jesus. They were all praising Jesus. Praise God. God saved her. I was like, no, I didn't say this, but that man right there saved her. That's who did it. With everything in life, for some reason, we want to give credit where maybe credit isn't always due. So, just another word on indoctrination. I once proved in calculus class that 0 equals 1. I did prove it. I'm positive of it. My teacher gave me a bad grade for doing it, but he did not threaten to burn me for it. In addition to science classes, I took a lot of religious classes because religion still interested me. I hadn't given up on Jesus or God yet. I would eventually end up down here in this corner, but I learned there are a lot of people around the world who have different beliefs, and I learned a whole lot about how you come into those beliefs. So a lot of it has to do with where you're brought up, even where you're from. I eventually did end up rejecting Jesus. There were just too many contradictions for me. There to me wasn't even enough. I know this is an argument we won't get into whether he was real or not, but there was too much blood. The fact that a human had to be sacrificed for me, and that I was a flawed person. I was told I was flawed, and I could not know how good I was making it into heaven without Jesus, and I just could not accept that idea. I'm responsible for my own sins. Eventually, this would lead to me walking away from religion. I flirted with Judaism. I learned some basic Hebrew. I started reading, there's a famous passage in Isaiah. Don't mean to upset anybody here, but the verse does not predict a virgin birth. I can read the Hebrew to you in its native, from the great scroll of Isaiah. It does not say that. And I just said, look, I'm going to be a good person and not get into this. The only bad review I've ever got on my book actually said that the one thing I did wrong was that I did all this great work in learning the Bible and learning religion, but I didn't end up coming back to God at the end. And I was not a good thing because Mark decided it's okay, just okay to be a good atheist. Only bad review I got. I'm thankful for it. It tells me how people look at life.
But you still got 3 stars.
I still got 3 stars. I still got 3 stars. Yeah, I know. I'm waiting on Ken Ham to leave that 1 star. I do not leave reviews on Ken Ham's books because I think it would be unfair for me to. I'm a little biased. But anyway, so yeah, I was happy with myself, and once again, I lived happily ever after. Just kidding, again, no. What I found out was the world was not content to let me be myself. I could not just believe what I wanted to believe. On street corners, I had people preaching to me. At family functions, I had people coming up, putting their arms around me, telling me, Mark, we're very concerned about you. We don't think you're going to make it into heaven. We're really worried. At work, people would leave religious pamphlets on my desk, even in large cities that you would think would be more progressive. And we're winding up here, but 2 really significant things. Politics, schools, and I'm going to say a third, secular life. Religion really started encroaching. And I think that we have a scary future because of this. I know you guys are familiar with a lot of laws going on now. Roe v. Wade has been overturned based on, a large part, religious objections. We're spending millions of dollars to put Bibles into schools. We have laws coming into schools and telling us what we can do. I'm going to give an example of one of those in a minute that will shock the crowd, I think. So I realize these people are not going to go away, and it's the fundamentalists. They're not happy living their own lives. They want to pray on the floor, at political conventions. Thanking God for dead soldiers. It's not just Christian fundamentalists. We have Hindu or Sikh nationalists who are attacking Muslims. We have Muslims attacking other Muslims because they're Sunni or Shia. Fundamentalists are just not happy to leave well enough alone. So I'm Mark Alsop. Nobody knows who I am. I'm just this guy with this message that some people say are interesting. Why does my story matter? Well, in November in Kentucky, House Bill 2 will seek to overturn our Constitution and force taxpayers to pay for private and religious schooling. We're going to vote on overturning our Constitution. And I'm segueing into my second book, and I promise we're almost done here. I brought some of these if you want to look at them. This is Accelerated Christian Education. Here's a couple screen snapshots. This is what children who are being homeschooled right now, children in over 6,000 religious schools are being taught. Multiple, for the word building exercise, draw a line under the right answer. Jesus, or Jus is God's son. This is a geography book. This is a geography book. My God. The science books teach evolution is evil. The history books teach that in the South, slavery might not have been the best thing, but it wasn't all that bad either. And that's going to be one of my end slides. So we've got House Bill 2, Accelerated Christian Education, school vouchers that we're going to be voting on in November. We also have this book, if you have not read it, it's a tough read. Project 2025 is a huge affront to education. The one part I found out, I'm surprised nobody else has called this out in the press yet. I need to get hooked up with a reporter because it does call for mass executions. Project 2025 does call for mass executions, and then the second book, I actually quote where this is. The whole thing there, it's chilling language. The death row has become too populated, and we need a final solution. Or some where have you heard that? I'm paraphrasing, but no more Department of Education. Religious freedom as long as you happen to be a fundamentalist Christian. Religious freedom for everybody else doesn't really count. And the thing about overturning the Department of Education is scary because I guess a lot of you are probably familiar with Ron DeSantis in Florida. He passed a law or an executive order recently to teach children that slavery was beneficial to the enslaved because it taught them a trade. When I was a kid, 8th grade in school in Whitley County, Kentucky, my history teacher in a public school, a conservative public school, told me slavery was okay because nobody would ever spend that much money on something and treat it badly.
Oh.
This is a Kentucky public school. Public school. Private schools are going to be even worse. Now, my church told me it was even better because the Africans got to learn about Jesus. And if you listen to some of the fundamentalists, like Ron DeSantis, they're actually out there saying this out loud. They're saying it out loud. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They call it critical race theory, which is not taught K through 12.
No.
That's an advanced college subject. But if you go back to Project 2025, I'm scrolling backwards in the slides. 2025 is all about critical race theory. I think it has like 47 mentions. What they really mean is they're not going to teach us about how we treated Africans. There's very little in there about, in any of this, about how we treated Indians, the Trail of Tears. There's one quote, a really chilling quote from Accelerated Christian Education. I took one for the team and read about 100 of these books. That there were good people and bad people on both sides during the wars with the Indians. That the Indians were doing some really bad things and they got what was coming. Where else have you heard that there were good and bad people? Do you remember Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
Chancellorsville. We don't learn from history and we pay for it. Wrapping up next, coming up next, don't read and talk at the same time. So I have a follow-up to this book, which tries to answer the questions, why does Mark's story really matter on the national stage? Why should it matter to other Kentuckians? Why should you guys tell people, not just about me, but tell them about my message? You don't have to give them my name. But Bound by Faith is supposed to be released on October 16th, and it takes Journey to Reason, the first book, and ties events in this book to things that are going on with Project 2025, with the Accelerated Christian Education. So I actually have been through 2025 and this stuff, and it's frightening how much it all dovetails. Interesting on Project 2025, Heritage Foundation wrote this. They got their start with Ronald Reagan. When they came into being with him, they gave him a plan like 2025. He implemented over 60% of it. And it's very frightening. And most of the second book is just me saying, this is what we worried about. Here's where they wanted to come true. If 60% of Project 2025 comes true, we are in a lot of trouble. We're in a whole lot of trouble. Some late-breaking things. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Kentucky Faith Trail. Oh. Please become familiar with the Kentucky Faith Trail. And I promise I'm almost done. The Kentucky Faith Trail, Kentucky gave $300,000 in taxpayer money to a visitors bureau in northern Kentucky. Now, where in Kentucky have you ever heard of us giving taxpayer money to a religious, right? The Faith Trail is a link of 11 different Christian sites across Kentucky. They're all Christian. The two prominent members, anybody want to guess? Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis, and Christian Museum get about 50% of the advertising. So I've been in a Freedom of Information Act battle with these people since the start of the year, and I just won. I got notification today that there are 8,000 to 9,000 documents that I've been petitioning to receive, and the Attorney General ruled in my favor, and I'm going to get these documents. I don't know what's going to be in them. I can't make any promises, but I went after links between the Visitors Bureau and Ken, especially what Ken Ham is doing and everything. So we're at the end, finally. But please let's stay in touch. There are a lot of different ways you can find me out there. I run a website called Bad Science Debunked, which takes on like junk science. There's not a lot of religion to it. I've got a little radio show now on WFMP out of Louisville. It comes out in a couple of weeks. I'm just a guest on Bench Talk. I debunk like climate change myths and vaccine myths and so forth. I've got an author page on Facebook. At allsit.net. You don't have to memorize this. There are some cards up here if you want to take one that will tell you where I'm at. I'm on a lot of podcasts. I want to put a shout in for an excellent podcaster, Robert Shaw, the Unshaw podcast. If you are a humanist, this is a podcast you should listen to. You will not be disappointed. You're familiar with Mary Schweitzer, who did found the red blood cells and tissue. She's an upcoming guest. So I got in early. He's bringing in people. The guy that replaced Richard Dawkins at Oxford was a recent guest. So you'll find me in places like this. And that's it. I want to say thank you for having me. I've got 5 paperbacks. Feel free to grab a copy. There's no obligation. You don't have to give me any contact information. I can only get the printer to work. These are, if you're into audiobooks, Audible download codes. You can grab a free audiobook. Help yourself to those. It's just first come, first serve. The only thing I would ask is please, even if it's 1 star, leave a review on Amazon, because that's how independent authors make it or don't make it. That's it. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. Thank y'all.